afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Alexandra Silvestri, and I am the Learning and Development Manager. I will be moderating today's live Power Hour session. Today's topic, from Boomer to Generation Z, the best of four worlds. We'll discuss and examine the stereotypes that each generation has of one another. And also, we'll be trying to hone in on the strengths of the collective generations and try to encourage you to have collaborations between each of the generations. With a mix of facts and audience polling and sharing the experience and opinions of our panelists, we have a great program for you today. But before I have our panelists introduce themselves, I do have a few of housekeeping items to go over with you. Today's session is being recorded and will be available for viewing 48 hours after the session. It will be uploaded onto Lessonly and also onto our YouTube channel. Note that everyone, aside from our panelists, will be muted throughout the duration of the event. And this is to cut down on some of the interruptions that we may potentially have. I know that everyone's at work, so between customers interrupting us or someone tapping you on the shoulder, we just want to make sure that we minimize some of the background noise. However, we do want you to engage with us. There will be 2 polls that we will be launching to you. You will be clicking on the poll's answers and giving your opinion. So your opinion and your voice is important to us. Aside from that, we also want to know if you agree with one of our panelists, if you want to give us a virtual high five or, "Ooh, yes, girl." So by clicking on the emotions and on our Zoom, you'll be able to share some of what you're feeling with us. All of our questions will be held until the end of the presentation, when Justina will be reading some of your questions aloud. So without further ado, I invite our panelists to introduce themselves.
Okay, I'll start. My name is Rick Lindsay. I'm the Vice President of Administration. I'm corporate, but my office is out of Benigno, and I travel from place to place quite a bit. Been here for just under 11 years, and I'm representing the Boomer generation, so I am told. Xanthia?
Hi, everybody. I'm Xanthia Nichols. I am the Vice President of Business and Community Development. That, in the short, is really diversifying the business portfolio outside of retail. So any type of business that we would start up that would not be retail based is kind of what I do, and also strengthen our community relationships with business partners. I have been with Goodwill for quite some time. I am from the Gen X population. So I have been at Goodwill Delaware for 20 years, Goodwill of the Chesapeake for 1 year, and Goodwill of Southern New Jersey and Philadelphia for 3 years.
All right, so I'll go next. My name is Amanda. I am the store manager at our Bordentown location. I have been with Goodwill for 1.5 years now, and I am representing the millennials.
The best generation.
Good afternoon. My name is Edwin Maldonado. I'm a store manager at the Cardiff store. I've been here at this store right now about 3 years, and with the company total about 7 years.
And which generation do you represent?
Oh, millennials. Sorry about that.
Hey, I'm Tyler Wild. I'm the HR analyst. I work at the corporate office in Maple Shade. I've been here almost a year now. In July, I'll be here a year, and I'm representing the Gen Z.
Hi, everybody. My name is Justina. I am the Talent Acquisition and Retention Specialist. I work here at the Maple Shade corporate office, and I'm representing the millennial generation.
Perfect. So thank you so much for introducing yourselves. Before I go into some of the questions that we have for our panelists, I would like to open it up with the English novelist George Orwell. George Orwell once said that every generation imagines itself to be more intelligent than the one that went before it and wiser than the one that comes after it. So it's safe to say that every generation makes assumptions and buys into stereotypes of the other's age groups, highlighted more recently with the hashtag OKBoomer memes. It is our hope that through this presentation, we can dismantle some of those stereotypes and give you ideas on how to leverage each generation's strength. So let's start off by defining what each generation is. Our Gen Zs, or Tyler's generation, were born between 1995 and 2015. Gen Z is really the generation that has been born and raised on technology. They're also the generation who has had a lot of school shootings and drills on how to hide from a school shooter. So this is a generation that feels the most at risk when it comes to their safety. And that does play a big part on how they interact with others. We have the millennials born between 1980 and 1994. The millennials are the bridge when it comes to technology. We remember beepers and pagers and payphones, but also grew up with dial-up, wireless, and also cell phones, smartphones. We are impacted by 9/11, and we are shortly going to be the biggest generation in the workforce. Our Gen Xers were born between 1965 and 1979, and our Gen Xers are the most independent of all the generations because they were also called the latchkey generation, where they pretty much took care of themselves. Their parents gave them the key and said, go home and don't open the door to strangers. Here's some money, order some pizza. So they are our most independent generation. And their values are about independence and getting the work done. Then we have our boomers. Our baby boomers were born between 1944 and 1964. And this generation was shaped by the end of World War II, Vietnam War, and also hippie culture. So now we want to hear from you guys. Who is in the room right now? Based on your birth year, not how you feel, but based on your birth year, which group, which generation do you belong to? And Justina's going to go ahead and launch that poll for us.
All right. Well, according to the results, we have 60% who are Generation X and 40% who are millennials.
Sorry, Rick. Perfect. So this just gives us an idea of who is in the room with us. Goodwill's breakdown currently is broken down mostly by those 4 generations. However, most industries have a 5 generation in the workplace. They have the Generation Z, the Millennials, Generation X, Boomers, and also the traditionalists. Most traditionalists have retired, but they are still a strong part of the workforce. At Goodwill presently, we only have 1% of traditionalists in our workforce. Everything up is pretty equally divided between the other generations. All right, so now I'm going to open it up to our panelists. And this question is for all of our panelists. In your opinion, what are some of the strengths your generation brings to the workforce? And I'm gonna have you answer it the reverse order, starting with Tyler. What is some of the strengths that your generation brings to our workforce?
So I think number one, I think one of our biggest strengths, I think we have a pretty good understanding of technology and how it works, being that we were pretty much brought up on it, and it's kind of been in our lives in almost whatever we do. I feel like we have a pretty good understanding of, like I said, how technology works. I feel like that kind of helps play into my role a little bit as an HR analyst. So yeah.
Thank you. Edwin, speaking on behalf of the millennials, what are some strengths that we bring to the table?
I would say also technology, and even before that, we learned how to do things without technology. So we learned, I guess, going hand in hand with both items, like, and and learning to adapt without it, I would say.
Perfect. Amanda, what's your take?
So piggybacking on what Tyler and Edwin was saying, I mean, even though technology played a big role in our generation, I think the fact that we didn't depend on it as much as the generation now does, I think our communication skills are better because of it. And we verbalize better because we don't have, I guess you could say, the text message slang. So I would say that for us, like our written and our verbal skills may be a little bit better than our current generation because we're not strictly just stuck on like text messaging like they are now.
Perfect. Cynthia?
So, it's funny because I'm at the middle of kind of where it is. I really think that the Gen X population, as you stated earlier, really is a self-reliant population. They bring diversity and practicality and really understanding work-life balance and a level of flexibility, not to the degree that they're not flexible, but we understand what flexibility should look like in the workplace, and we try to be responsive to that. But I think that they have a level of really employee engagement and connectivity and understanding and empathy.
I think millennials have that too. We're going to steal your answer. And okay, Rick, how about your generation? What are some strengths that you bring to the table?
Well, I would think obviously experience and perspectives and relationships, because I've had long-term relationships with all of these generations, and I have children and grandchildren, and I've coached at various levels for years, different sports and things like that myself. But I think, like I said, having the experience is a great teacher, and things you can share with people, things you can develop in common with people. And so I would think that's kind of a resource that can be a very handy when you're dealing with people and trying to communicate.
Thank you. Now we're going to share an AARP study. An AARP found that 60% of workers report the presence of generational conflict in their workplace, with 70% of older employees dismissing the abilities of their younger colleagues, and nearly 50% of younger colleagues dismissing the abilities of older coworkers. This intergenerational tension often sets in perception. It's in perception and not necessarily in fact, right? So the way all stereotypes start is that there may be some trickle of fact in there, but mostly it is, our perceptions that run wild. And with that said, and this is for all of the managers in the group, what are some challenges that you face when managing a multi-generational workforce?
I can start off. I think for me, when you're working with someone in a generation older than you, you definitely have to earn their respect. Since especially like I know for me, I have a lot of employees where they have kids my age. So I had to earn my place and show them that I know what I'm talking about. And, my information that I'm giving them is valued, and I do value their time and the years that they have put in. And then when it comes to your older generation and the younger generation working together, I do feel as though that the younger generation sometimes dismisses the older because maybe they're not as receptive to change. So I think that creates a little bit of challenge where the older generation sometimes might be a little more stuck in their ways because they've been here so long, where the younger generation are more open to change and kind of adapting.
I agree with her on a lot of the aspects there. I find it interesting, and I think it's because of my background, and I came from a technological background, and I have difficulty sometimes dealing with people that are in my generation, trying to bridge the gap with technology and use of technology. I mean, with our safety program and the oversight that we have for everything, you look at all of our training, it's technology based. And, so, with a prior safety manager, there's a lot of resistance to that because I think he was just a little younger than I was actually. But, we wanted to move to basically be paperless. And we wanted our training to use as a force multiplier technology and have, less in-person training when we could. I mean, there's obviously a place for that. But, so like I said, I think I find more difficulty with older employees than younger employees at times. But I think, I think it works all the way around. You can make it work. But I do see the challenges like Amanda mentioned.
For the first time in history, we have like 5 generations in the workplace, ranging from the traditionalists all the way to the Gen Zers. So just think, if you're putting 60 years of work experience in there to work together and really mix together and say, oh, now take your beliefs and your traditions and all of the things you're used to and go work together and be nice and play together. You can imagine that's not always going to go great. Let's just be realistic. I think the solution for me when working with a diverse population and a multi-generational workforce is really the key is the manager that's in there and the management and their ability to identify who the workers are and the best way to work with them and to teach them to work together because it's ever evolving. So, you really have to look at who you're working with and how you work with them. And then to add into that multi-generational workforce, you have to add yet another layer of diversity and inclusion because you still, on top of the multi-generation, don't know what level you're getting an employee at. So it's complicated. So, that's when being a manager is the most difficult.
Right. And these generation years are just a blanket, right? Mm-hmm. There's also a lot of things that goes into identifying who an employee is, not just what generation they're a part of. And it's also cultural. You could be a millennial, but depending where you were raised or how you were raised, you may not have had access to technology the way that one of your counterparts would have. So yes, you're definitely right. Edwin, what do you think?
The only situation I had with that was Paycom. Mostly Paycom just created more work for me because of like you said, the older generation just doesn't really want to deal with it sometimes. So now I find that I'm more involved in that with them, like just simple stuff like time changes, days off and requests off, all that stuff. Other than that, like that's the only challenge was that, but with everything else, I try to help everyone understand whatever changes come to the workplace is to make the job better and easier. And most of them understand. That's all the common goal.
Thank you. And then our youngest,
You're welcome.
Tyler, what are some challenges that you have faced working with a multi-generational workforce?
Even though I don't really manage anyone specifically, I think it does kind of relate when it comes to coworker relationships and just people that we work with every day. I guess it's really kind of understanding where people come from. A lot of the times it is a technological thing, kind of what Evan just said when it comes to Paycom. Like sometimes I'll have someone asking or calling me up asking for help with their onboarding just because they might not be able to access it or whatnot. But it really is just understanding where they come from and trying to be patient and just helping them work through it is all.
Next question is for Rick and Xanthia. How has communication evolved during your career and how does it impact how you communicate within the workplace today?
So I'd say in comparison from previous generations, technology's drastically changed the way we communicate, especially in the workplace. I mean, we're sending messages in real time and getting information in real time, whereas previously folks were sending letters and mail and waiting 3 to 7 days for a response, or, they're advertising on television and going to movie theaters versus live streaming. They're landlines where most people don't have landlines anymore. So I think we've seen the drastic shift. And then fast forward into COVID and we've seen an even more drastic shift to utilizing technology to communicate. One thing I think that we have to be mindful of, and it goes back to what we kind of previously referenced, is our organization is not always working with individuals that have had access to all this technology or have been in spaces to learn how the technology works. So when we're having these communications, these courageous conversations throughout the organization, we need to keep in mind that the folks that we are serving or that are utilizing us may not have access to the knowledge that some of us may have had. So that skill gap sometimes leaves and causes a hiccup in communication throughout. So those are just some of the things we have to think about. We store stuff in the cloud and we don't have to go to the file cabinet anymore. You can get it wherever you need it. I recall earlier in my day, if you were in court or you were doing something and you didn't have the document with you, you had to ask for continuance. Now you could just say, can I step out? I'll bring it up. You print it out and you can bring it back in. So it's just that kind of drastic step forward. I mean, it's great, but you have to be mindful of how you bring people along and how you include them.
Yeah, I agree with everything Xanthia said. I mean, you look at what we're doing exactly right now. We're all in different locations. We're not together, but we are because of technology. That drastically helped during COVID, obviously, and I think that helped advance it. But I mean, you look at GPS, for instance. I know when I first started in the workforce, there was nothing like that, and now I don't think people could get half the places they go if they didn't have GPS. So it just, yeah, it just technology is a huge crutch, and it helps everybody. However, one other thing too are cameras. Cameras are everywhere, and obviously I deal with cameras. But cameras are an imposition for people at times. We got to remember we have customers with cameras, and that works for us in a lot of ways. And then from a loss prevention or a customer service aspect, that can be a real detriment. We've had customers filming other customers and taking video of our store and posting it. And so, like I said, it's a double-edged sword. A lot of times the communication and the technology is a double-edged sword. I think overall it's really helpful. Sometimes I think something that gets lost is the human contact and how important that is, and especially in our business, in our line of business, and dealing with clients. It's really important, for our employees to actually still have human contact, still go out and greet and meet people, and make sure they know they're valued. I think that's a huge aspect. And I think we're pretty good at that, and that's something that can't get lost.
I agree with both of you. And even thinking about communication, when I was first in the workforce straight out of undergrad, Fridays came, I tried to email everybody back, call everybody back, and I didn't have to think about it until Monday because we didn't have the smartphones or even the Outlook that we had for work. I couldn't access outside of my office. Fast forward to now where I get an email and not necessarily at Goodwill, but in my former position, I was expected to answer immediately. If you didn't answer that email immediately, there would be some repercussions. If you didn't call back immediately, there would be some repercussions. So I think it's, communication has really brought us together, even though we're apart, but at the same time has really put pressure on that maybe older generations don't necessarily understand. Like my mom is like, why are you working on the weekends? You're not going into the office. And I'm saying, yes, but I got an email from, the president of the university and I have to answer now. And not understanding that clocking out doesn't really mean clocking out because technology sees you everywhere, whether it's a camera or an email or a text, you're always accessible. So thank you. Let's look at life priorities. One of the things that the generations have that that separates them, aside from the years that they were born, is what they consider priority in the moment. So the chart that you see on the screen is based on age range and in rank order, what those people find important. So our 21 to 34-year-olds find work, then friends, then family, then independence important. Ages 35 to 54 find family, then work, then friends, and cognitive fitness to be important. 55 to 65 is very similar, except that it has health before friends, and work is not even in there. So it's family, health, friends, and then cognitive fitness. For 65 to 85-year-olds, it's family, health, cognitive fitness, and then our friends. And then for our traditionalists, ages 86 to 104, it's health, family, thinking about life, and then cognitive fitness. So looking at this chart and wanting to hear from our participants, do you agree with that? Do you think that, in fact, the life priorities are correct when it comes to your age range? And I'm gonna launch that poll, and if you can just answer that for me. And here is our results. Some of you don't agree with it. And Justina will open that for questions later on. So if you have any questions or anything that you would like to share, please put that into the chat box. And at the end of our presentation, Justina will be taking those questions and we'll be referring them over to our panelists. For my two store managers, Amanda and Edwin, does workplace culture change depending on the generation that you have on your team? And if it does, does it change for the better? Is it changing for the better?
I do think that it changes depending on the generation, but I do think that it's changing for the better. I think, millennials, I know for me here in my building, I think building that morale and bridging that gap between generations is super important for me, where I think, like the younger generation doesn't necessarily might think as a CSA, might not think of this as a career. Where I know that when I started off as a sales associate straight out of college, I was thinking about being in a job long-term and building that career. So I think the different generations in the workforce help to bridge those gaps a little bit and change the mindset of, this is not just like a clock in and clock out. You got to give your 100% the whole time. And, building those goals of like, well, where do you see yourself? Do you want to grow? So I think we're at a place in time, especially with, like you said earlier, millennials being the biggest generation in the workforce. We're taking the generation under us and kind of almost taking them under our wings and helping them see those values differently, and kind of shift their mind a little bit of like, not every job is just a clock in and out. It should be a stepping stone for next. Where I also see the older generation before me, they tend to stay at jobs a lot longer than our generation, where we move on to next faster. If it's something that it doesn't work for us, then we're always looking for the next step, where they tend to deal with a lot more than what we do. I have people here that have been here 30 years, 15 years, where like our generation tends to change jobs even faster. And then the generation even after us changes even faster than us. So I think, that culture changes in the workforce depending on the generation.
With the different generations, I noticed with the younger generation, they're mostly here at the part-time job to get by with college. So a lot of them are just here that way they have work and the extra income for college, depending on their situations. Like if they have kids or something like that, then it's different. With the older generation and my generation, most of them are here. Like I said, like try to have them all understand the goals in mind and like try to make it a fun working environment and have them want to come to work per se. And I try to lead by example with all of them, with all the generations. I'm not the type to tell people mostly what to do. I try to do it with them. So like, for example, just if there's a table instead of telling them to pick up the table, I'll pick up one side and they pick up the other side. Let's pick it up together, that kind of thing.
Amanda, you bring up a really interesting point. The baby boomers and our Generation X tend to be loyal to the company that they work for, and they tend to see things as, I work hard enough and I stay here long enough, I will grow within the company. Whereas millennials and Generation Z, if they don't see the immediate value of where they are, they tend to leave a position a lot faster. It used to be when I started in the workforce that people would look at your resume, and if you left a job within a year or two, that was frowned upon. Now it's common, right? People don't usually stay in a position more than 5 years. And if you have been in a place for too long, instead of asking, well, wow, that's wonderful, you're loyal to your company, how has that experience been for you? It's like, well, why haven't you moved? Why are you still there? So things have definitely changed, and you bring up a good point. In 2020, the number of people ages 60 and older outnumbered children younger than 5 years of age. So we are having a situation, not just in the US, really internationally, where there aren't enough people being born to keep up with the population and the workforce needs. So as our traditionalists move out of their positions and our boomers remain in their position longer, we really need them to persist, because we just don't have enough workers in the workforce to fill up some of the holes. And once the baby boomers leave, and our Generation X stay, we really have to encourage them to remain in the workforce as well, because we do need them to not just share their experience in the workplace, but also to be here to work for us, because we don't have enough younger people being born. So with that, and seeing how a lot of the challenges that we have intergenerationally have to do with technology, I open this question up to everyone, starting with Tyler. How has social media impacted the workplace?
When I first saw this question, I didn't know how exactly I would maybe try to respond to it, because I feel like social media in my life, at least, it's kind of been around for a long time, at least in my life. I can remember going back to excuse me, when I was in 7th or 8th grade, I'm like, all my friends are making a Facebook account. I'm like, oh, I'll make one too. So I feel like it's always been around for me. And I guess I don't really have a good answer in terms of how it impacts the workplace, just because I'm not too sure, or I don't really have a perception of how the workplace looks like without social media being involved in it. So I guess it's more so normalized for me more than anything.
Social media, to me, it's I don't have social media per se, but I feel like it's at work and store level, it's more of a distraction sometimes for the employees. But in a bigger role, I feel like in marketing and putting the company out there, or whatever you need to do, to bring more to the stores or the company, I feel like it's a great tool. But yeah,
it definitely has made our brand more accessible to others. So I definitely agree with you on that. Amanda?
So I think social media is a double-edged sword. So personally, I don't like social media, but I understand the benefits of social media. So I know definitely in the workforce, one thing that I love about it is I use a lot of my social medias for when I have job postings. I post it in there all the time. I'm constantly on either LinkedIn or on my Instagram posting any opportunities that I have. So I know I have gotten a lot of applicants or candidates through social media. But definitely one great tool to use when you want to expand. You back in the day, you used to I remember working in places where you just had hiring tables in front of your retail stores, and you would just hope that someone would walk by and grab an application. Now you have so many more avenues that you can use social media for to try to bring in new applicants. But at the same time, piggybacking where Edwin was saying, I do feel like it is a distraction in the workforce. You have employees that are on their breaks, but are taking longer breaks because they're too busy taking selfies in the bathroom. Or at the same time, let's say someone calls out, you could have managers like, well, I saw them on Facebook yesterday doing X, Y, and Z, so that's the reason why they're calling out. So then you tend to look at employees a little differently because you're like, well, is that call legitimate? Because I know what you were doing yesterday. And then at the same time too, it opens up that opportunity for either you to talk good about a company or talk bad about a company. So I think because everything is on social media nowadays and it's so normalized, it can kind of be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how you look at it and how you use it.
There are advantages and disadvantages, of course, in social media. I would say from the advantage perspective, it's gonna, of course, it aids with recruitment. You're allowed to get your brand message out. It's going to deliver communications effectively and efficiently, and it can be managed. It allows you to engage employees in a realistic, in-time, live way. It allows for you to have professional networks and to see who's connected and how they're connected if you know how to use it. The disadvantages are equal to that. It's a security nightmare sometimes. It's negative exposure if it's not managed. It's sometimes it's illegal if you do some things that you shouldn't do with it. So, I mean, there's always going to be pros and cons. It's really, I think, how we manage it, how we train and share with people what they should be using as it relates to our organization. I mean, I just look at what we've added lately, the media alert, where you can kind of walk people through when there's a professional disaster, or, we can say, hey, folks, this group of people needs to do this because there's going to be a tornado or not, hopefully not. But, there's always going to be pros and cons to everything. So, it just has to be managed, and we have to set the expectations so folks know what our expectation as it relates to Goodwill is.
Agree. Rick?
I agree with everybody. It unites and divides us. I think it's an extremely useful tool for marketing and for informational purposes. It's really important to people, probably too important to some people. And so it becomes a workplace issue at times, which is very obvious. But like I said, blessing and a curse. We see customers, if they're not happy, that gets posted. If there's an incident, that can get posted. If there's a perceived, we had incidents with customers refusing to wear masks and taking their stand on social media. And a lot, you may not know this, but a lot of times, if there's an incident and there's a potential for negative social media exposure, I always notify, senior staff, and I always notify Julie. Because so she's aware and she's not going to get blindsided by anything. And so I think that's important. That, like I said, it's I think just about everybody said it's managing it. It's something to be managed.
And I often wonder if we're going to go backwards and get rid of social media because there's just too much exposure, right? Like, you want to pick your nose, but I don't know if Rick is watching me on the camera, or you have a human moment and someone really takes advantage of that and records you, and the next thing you know, you're all over, YouTube. No, nobody uses YouTube really. Instagram, or what's that? The TikTok. So, it's funny looking at social media and how the generations use it. The biggest generation to use Twitter is actually our baby boomers. The biggest generation to use Facebook is actually Generation X. For Instagram is millennials, and for TikTok, it's our Generation Z. So you can also see how you may think you're hip because you're using social media, but the younger generation might think that you're not using the right one. So definitely helps us put our branding out there. But yes, we have to know how to manage social media and leverage it in a way that makes us look better, whether it's you as an individual or the organization as a whole.
Alex, I promise you, social media will never go away. The amount of money that is attached to social media, it'll never go away. There may be legislation to support it. It will never go away.
And even if you try to remove yourself as an individual, then you just are behind. You don't know how to use the next thing because it all builds on one another. So yeah, I wonder what's going to happen. My kid is 3. When he's a teenager, it's probably going to be holograms, right? Like what's left. I feel like we can see everything. So, and the last question for my panelists, for whomever would like to answer, I won't call on you. What are some commonalities that you see between each generation in the workforce?
I guess I could start because I have to jump off in a minute, and I love this. Thank you for having me, Alex. I think one commonality that you're going to see generationally, period, is that employees want to know what's going on. So communication's key. I don't think you can over communicate expectations. Folks need to know what expectations they are. They need to know outcomes. They need to know outputs. They need to know what's expected of them. They need to know that there's a sense of well-being and that they can be heard in the workplace. You don't have to agree with them. You do need to hear them. And there needs to be a level of empathy when you are dealing with people, because people are just that, human, and humans have emotions that need to be dealt with. I think organizationally, there needs to be just a really clean understanding of how things are communicated and really a big picture so that folks can know why they exist and what they're doing as a part of the team. And I think that's what I see as a commonality between all generations and all employees.
To piggyback on that, I think one more biggest point that no matter what generation you're in is just that recognition, that pat on the back, like good job. I think no matter what generation you're in, I think that giving that recognition to an employee, whether they expect it or whether or not they need it, honestly, just giving them that recognition, giving them that pat on the back, like just saying that good job. I know me as a manager, that's one thing that I make sure I do every single day with every single one of my employees when they're leaving for the day. I'm also like, hey, thank you so much for all the work you did today. Thank you so much, like good job. That's one thing I pride myself that I always say, because I know I've worked in places where I never got the recognition, and even though I didn't need it would have been nice. So that's one thing that as a manager, I feel like no matter what generation you're in, sometimes it's nice to just know that you did a good job. Like somebody just tell you, you rock.
My fortune cookie the other night, truth said, imagine the good you can do if you gave credit instead of took it. And I thought that was kind of profound. That's exactly what you're saying. But you know what? We're more alike than different. I think people absolutely need to know kind of how they fit, where they fit, and it's important to them. Myself, I always try to pull people along. I try not to push them, and I try to make people feel valued. That's what that's how I feel. And I think a lot of our managers do as well.
Definitely. Thank you. I just want to thank our panelists. Thank you so much for your insight. Now we're going to open it up to the questions.
I have one question, and the question is, I believe it's open to everyone, and it says, is the intergenerational tension growing or less than in the years past?
What tension? Maybe I think that's more of a almost like a social media phenomena than anything else. But I don't feel tension with other generations personally. Everybody's different. We're all individuals. People have different experiences and bring different skill sets. But I personally don't feel any tension. There may be some tension, but I don't see it growing.
I have a question myself, because I overheard you guys saying that the younger generation, they tend to leave the workforce a lot quicker than older generations. So I'm kind of curious. Why do you think, I should say, they tend to leave, in your opinion? Like, what is it exactly that makes them feel like, I don't want to be here. I'd rather just move on to something else and just not stick it out?
One thing that I have seen a lot, especially with like the Gen Z generations, I feel like they're more prone to be entrepreneurs. And I think that's great. So I think they, try to join the traditional workforces, but if they're not getting, like Alex said, that like quick response, that quick growth, that quick recognition, then they're always like, well, I might as well just do my own thing, be my own boss. Where I think, there weren't as so many entrepreneurs. And I think, social media plays a big part too of, like, I know during COVID, so many people started their own business. They were home and they were just trying to figure out kind of, what can I do? How can I make money? How can I utilize my skills or my hobbies and make it? So I think a lot of that too plays a big part of why they're leaving more quickly, because they want to be just more self-sufficient.
Okay. I definitely would agree with that.
Yeah.
For sure.
And I would add, I 100% agree with Amanda. Another add-on is simply that the way the school systems are set up now, and the educational training that you guys are given, and the way they teach you about careers. When I was going to school, they were like, choose your career. When you guys go to school, they're like, pick some things you can do, and then you'll have options of what you want to do. You went to law school, you went to medical school, you went to, you got a degree in bioscience or anthropology, and then you were like, what career can I do with this? The way the school systems are set up now is they have these career pathings, and children can take medical, and it could go from this level to this level, or it can transition to these jobs as well. And I think it's a breath of like, if I get in here and I've spent this money post-secondary and I don't love it, here's some other options I have that I could try. So I think that it's incredible that the schools shifted the way they kind of educate the person into a career, but it does make it hard for the employer, because you could decide that you're like, hey, I hate this, I'm moving on. And then you guys also don't have the amount of bills that a person that is more seasoned or in another generation might have. So you do have that flexibility. When you're first young and you're coming out of college, you could say, I don't like this job, I'm gonna try another, I don't like this. So I don't ever look at it when folks are really bouncing when they first leave school. Now, if you haven't figured it out by 33, I'm kind of like, what's going on? But when between that age of 21 to 30, I'm like, do what you do, figure out what you like, because you have a long time to work after you amass debt. So
yeah,
I don't think it's bad. I do get annoyed sometimes after we've trained you.
I agree. Well, thank you all so very much. Alex, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Perfect. So thank you all for participating in today's Power Hour. I think one of the key takeaways that we can take from this presentation is that we are all constantly learning from one another, whether you've been working in our warehouse for decades or just joined our retail team with a completely different background or skill set. All we all want is to be understood and respected. I always say we all want the same thing, to be able to, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So as long as we understand each other and try to understand each other's multiple perspectives, we can really build a collaborative workforce. To my panelists, thank you so much for being a part of this. Your input has been needed and is needed, and thank you so much for sharing with everyone. To our participants, thank you for taking the time to be on this presentation. In 4 to 8 hours, this will go on Lessonly and will also go on YouTube. Thank you all so much, and I wish you a wonderful rest of the week. Goodbye.